Funding for Schaeferless is provided by Squarespace, the sponsor of today's video. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Compared to studios like Disney or Pixar or DreamWorks where I grew up watching their movies, I never got to see any of the films from Studio Ghibli as a kid. In fact, prior to making this ranking video, I had only ever seen 2 of the Ghibli films beforehand, those being Spirited Away, which I watched in high school, and Kiki's Delivery Service, which I only just saw last year. Aside from those, this ranking video is my first time watching all of these films. And by God, I am so mad that I never grew up with these things. Studio Ghibli is absolutely incredible. How they manage to consistently put out quality products with slip-ups being incredibly rare is just so astounding. I'm so glad I finally got to experience some of the most iconic animated films ever made. It took me long enough, honestly. And yeah, I'm really excited to start ranking them all. A couple quick disclaimers. First, I watched all these movies dubbed, which for some reason will probably upset people. But like, these are really high quality, well-made dubs. The only one I thought was subpar in the slightest was Castle in the Sky, mostly because of the 2 main characters. Not Mark Hamill, he killed it. And I rewatched that one with subs just to make sure my opinion wasn't being affected by the dubs. Second, in terms of which movies counted for this ranking, I went off the list of Studio Ghibli Works Wikipedia article, which includes Nausicaa and Ocean Waves, despite that being a TV movie, but does not include The Red Turtle. I'm sorry, Red Turtle fans, I'm sure it's good, but it wasn't a full Ghibli production, so I banish it to the realm of not being talked about in a Schaeferless video. Maybe if I rank all the best animated feature nominees one day, then we'll get to it. I mean, how else am I gonna decide if it's better than Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius or not? And third, we have the copyright issue. Other YouTube rankings of Ghibli movies seem to be fine, but just in case, I'm gonna throw up this little border because I really want you to see these visuals when I talk about these films. Hopefully the border's not too intrusive. I think it's better than trying to watch it on Aardvark Matt Damon's TV. With all that said, why don't we jump right in?
Disappointment in the game of life!
Earwig and the Witch is worse than Cars 2.
What?
Every wrong decision that could possibly have been made during the production of this movie was made. Let's start with the elephant in the room. The animation. After so many stunning hand-drawn features, Ghibli finally made the jump into the realm of 3D animation, and yeah, it looks hideous. It looks worse than Toy Story, the first computer-animated film ever made in 1995. There's like 1 or 2 cool moments with the visuals, and the expressions are occasionally good at least, but for the most part, this is pure garbage. The character models, the environments, the textures, it all just looks like shit. But that's just the tip of the iceberg here. As an added bonus, the 2 main characters in this movie are horrendously unlikable, and they remain that way for the entire duration of the film. Earwig starts the film off as a spoiled brat who manipulates people in order to get what she wants all the time, and she ends the film off as a spoiled brat who manipulates people in order to get what she wants all the time. She learns absolutely nothing. She's the same unlikable and irritating twat throughout the entire film's runtime. She butts heads with this witch lady who treats her like garbage all the time and never shows an ounce of kindness until the very end, which, oh boy, we will get to. 95% of the movie, we just see her rudely ordering her new adopted daughter around. And yet, you're not rooting for Earwig to get back at her because Earwig is so insufferable. But you're not rooting for the witch lady either because she's a huge bitch. This movie is actual hell. I guess the Mandrake is okay and potentially interesting, but the movie doesn't ever feel like focusing on him that much, so f*** me, I guess. Another really cool, just super awesome thing about this movie is that it's the only Ghibli film I would describe as derivative. And that's too kind of a word to use. This shit is like if they took a greatest hits medley of previous Ghibli films and then ran it over with their car. Enjoy. There's a talking cat companion and witches because remember Kiki's Delivery Service? There's a young girl forced to work extremely hard for a mean old boss lady because don't you love Spirited Away? Oh look, they gotta make breakfast and have breakfast together and bond as a family and the demons help with their breakfast. Because yes, I also watched Howl's Moving Castle. While disguised as a writer, I guess we needed a dash of Whisper of the Heart too. Sure, why not? Throughout this entire Ghibli ranking, I never once felt like any of their films were copying their previous ones until we got to this dumpster fire. At least Cars 2 didn't blatantly copy what came before it. At least it had good looking animation. At least it actually finished its fucking story. This movie abruptly ends out of nowhere, with none of the character conflicts actually resolved. Earwig successfully kerpranks the witch lady and gets both her and the Mandrake absolutely furious at her with only 20 minutes left in the movie. She then goes into the Mandrake's private quarters without permission, finds out they were in a band with her mom, and now the Mandrake suddenly likes her. And so does the witch, who literally has not said a kind thing to her once throughout this entire movie. Suddenly, in the last 10 minutes of the film, it's a happily ever after now. 6 months pass, and they all suddenly love each other for some reason, and everyone in the house is a slave to the spoiled brat Earwig, and her mom suddenly comes back with no explanation as to where she was or why she came back at all. Isn't that great? Fuck this movie! Its few likable elements have been done before in much better Ghibli movies. Its characters are horrendously unlikable. Its animation is insanely unpleasant. Its story is objectively unfinished. This is my least favorite animated movie of all time. If I were Goro Miyazaki, I would flee the country at this point. I would literally never be able to look my father in the eyes again. Let's all just pretend this never happened and move on with our lives.
Back to formula.
Alright, let's get this over with. Tales from Earthsea is bad. Like, astonishingly bad. I didn't expect it to be as bad as it was. It's a completely lifeless and dull affair that utterly and hilariously failed to get me invested in anything. The world building in this movie is awful. We never get a good sense of how this fantasy world works and what sets it apart from any other fantasy world. We're told some stuff about dragons at the beginning that potentially seems interesting, and then the movie doesn't use dragons at all or even mention them until the very end, to the point where I forgot they were in the movie. We're told the world is suffering, but we hardly ever get to see it. The characters in this movie are generic fantasy archetypes with no distinguishing characteristics of their own. For most of the movie, we're expected to be invested in the main character's internal struggle, and yet I don't even know what it is. They don't even explain it until the final act, where it's done so poorly. The villain's motivation and plan is incomprehensible. Everyone's motivation is incomprehensible. There's no real plight or quest. Our hero just wanders around aimlessly and does whatever this wizard guy tells him. There's no scenes that endear us to the characters. There's no scenes where I care about any of them. Princess Mononoke had more levity than this piece of trash. Hell, you know what? Grave of the Fireflies had more levity than this. That's not good. This is a fantasy adventure movie, not a depressing war epic. The direction is hilariously lifeless and flat. The story and characters are shit. It's all just a colossal train wreck. To be fair, the ending is kinda cool visually, and Willem Dafoe does a really good job as the villain.
Misery, 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 that's what you've chosen. I offered you friendship, and you spat in my face.
I honestly feel really bad for Goro Miyazaki because he clearly wasn't experienced enough to direct this project, and I more so blame the studio for entrusting it to him. For his first feature film, it could have been worse. At least it wasn't Earwig and the Witch levels of bad.
It's disgusting!
Ocean man, take me by the—
Good lord, Ocean Waves is abysmal. Going in, I heard this was a smaller production by Ghibli's B team, but they somehow managed to turn in a D tier product that just frustrates me more and more the longer I think about it. First of all, it's boring. A huge chunk of this film is tepid melodrama surrounding relationships and crushes, and very little of it is engaging. There's a bit of gay subtext between the two male leads, but it's something the movie never capitalizes on and pretends doesn't exist by the conclusion. And they're both kind of boring characters anyway, so it's not like their relationship will be particularly interesting, even if it was romantic. The female lead in this is absurdly unlikable. She's constantly manipulative, ridiculously petty, super whiny, the whole shebang. She shows up at the main character's hotel room to cry about something, and I'm like, oh my god, did her dad do or say something really bad? But no, it's just these basic ass minor issues, like how her room has different colored wallpaper now.
Hey, other people have problems too, you know.
I'm glad the main character at least calls her out for being a bad person, but I guess I can flush that gladness down the drain because the movie concludes with him realizing that he was in love with her the whole time.
I like your Kudgy.
Not his best friend, who he's constantly extremely happy to see. There is no homo here whatsoever. Just this hysterical montage where the main character reminisces on all the great times he had with his female crush, and all the scenes he remembers are her acting like a bitch and manipulating and gaslighting him.
Clown comb!
They did not have a single positive interaction that could be used in this reminiscence montage. But that's okay because he's in love and it's a hetero love. What a relief. Honestly, I would have given this movie a 5 or 4 out of 10, but this ending dragged it down to a 3. This movie could go f*** off. It's 72 minutes, but it feels like an eternity. If the runtime was longer, maybe it could have allowed the film to develop the 3 main characters whose names I absolutely refuse to learn, and then maybe I'd get wrapped up in their story arcs. But as is, this barely even qualifies as a movie. It's just pure shit. Even if the ending didn't suck, it would still be boring. Just skip it.
Everyone's gonna hate me.
Before I tell you what movie's at this spot in the list, I just want to say that the gap between these bottom 3 movies and this one is massive. Those bottom 3 are bad. This one is only okay in my opinion. I do not hate this movie. With that said, I don't really know the best way to break this news to y'all, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. I don't get Howl's Moving Castle. Not a single aspect of this movie makes sense to me. It's a bizarre clusterfuck of all sorts of disparate tones and plot points that don't come together at all by the end. That wouldn't be so strange in and of itself, but the bizarre thing is that I seem to be the only person who feels this way towards this movie. Everyone loves it, and I genuinely do not understand why.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people, James. I didn't care about Better Call Saul, but this is going too fucking far. And hey, let me go. Let me go right now.
I mean, I'm happy for people who love it. Obviously, I wish I did too. I just don't get it. The opening 45 minutes or so are very charming, with this young woman being turned into an old lady, and so she seeks out the mysterious magic boy Howl and his magic castle, and she starts sweeping there, and there's a little boy and a Mike Wazowski fire. All this stuff is perfectly charming and a good first act. It got me invested in the whimsy and intrigue of this world and this mysterious castle. And then, once all this is set up, the plot entirely collapses into a series of barely connected and poorly built up events that don't convey any sort of intrigue or emotion because of how confusing they all are. I don't understand Howl at all. He acts so cheerful and friendly all the time, then suddenly has an out of nowhere emo temper tantrum because his hair turns the wrong color. I can't tell if he's supposed to be dark and brooding or happy and whimsical. This movie does such a poor job of establishing who exactly he is. The villain in this movie is also so poorly established. She lets so many innocents die in this war and then calls the entire thing off at the end because Howl fell in love, I guess? Why was she even causing this war to continue in the first place? Why does Sophie keep dipping in and out of her curse over the course of the movie? How exactly did her actions break the curse? Why did she need to be the one to reunite Howl's heart with his body? How did no one at any point notice Calcifer had Howl's heart inside of him? How did he not notice? Why did Howl give Calcifer his heart in the first place? Most Ghibli movies don't explain every single aspect of their world and plot, and that's perfectly fine, because I really like leaving this sort of stuff up to interpretation. I never had any questions about how or why the characters or the world operated the way they did in any of the previous Ghibli movies, but this one just piles on so much and leaves most of it incredibly murky. There's a lot more going on in movies like Nausicaa or Princess Mononoke, but I followed everything in those just fine, probably because the rules of their universes made sense and they kept their tones consistent throughout. This movie can't decide if it wants to be a beautiful romance film, a charming slice of life escapade, a brutal anti-war film, a mystical magical journey. Just none of it meshes. It's supposed to be this profound commentary on the Iraq War. That is real. That is not a joke. Look it up. And yet this idea never comes across well because the movie doesn't focus on it and develop the idea. Same goes for the romance. It just throws these elements in on top of everything else with no real threads to tie anything together. And it's not like I need to fully understand what's happening in the movie to enjoy it. Movies like I'm Thinking of Ending Things and Perfect Blue are 10 out of 10 films that I don't fully understand at all. An intentionally confusing and disorienting experience is perfectly fine as long as it elicits some sort of emotional response, which this movie just didn't. I felt nothing watching it, particularly in the second half. It's easily Miyazaki's weakest work and the biggest disappointment in this entire ranking. But again, this just seems to be a me problem since everyone loves this one.
And me and my army of teenage fangirls will—
And that is cool. Like I said, I am super glad this movie works so well for so many people. But the more I think about it and read about it and analyze it, the less I like it. And we really need to move on so I can start complimenting the movies I actually do like. Tanuki! Big balls! Pompoko isn't nearly as weird as most people were telling me going in. Just because these raccoons magically inflate their ball sacks and use them to beat people to death doesn't mean this is a weird movie. If anything, it's kind of a standard and a little bit boring movie. I just wasn't all that invested in this one. The premise of transforming raccoons who use their powers to fight back against humans stealing their land is a fun one. And there's a lot of neat sequences in this film, like the Nightmare Festival they put on. But overall, I just felt a certain disconnect from the story here. There wasn't really a central main character to latch onto for the majority of the film, and the kinda sorta mockumentary style they were going for with the narrator didn't really work for me. I felt like more of an observer, and I wasn't really getting invested in their struggle that much. Plus, this movie is way too long. There's a ton of subplots that just don't go anywhere and could easily be cut without anything really changing. After the first hour, I felt like I got the gist of the story already, but it just kept going. In all honesty, the most interesting part of the film was the last 10 minutes, showcasing how the raccoons finally give up and decide to start living as humans. Some of them can't make it in the human world, while some of them adapt a little too well and start encouraging the destruction of the forest for profit. If this is what the story was about, then I feel like it would have been a much stronger and more engaging film. There could be conflicts between the non-transforming raccoons and the transforming ones, since the non-transformers could think they've betrayed their roots. You could do a lot of commentary on how oppressive human society is by comparing it to raccoon society, where they all just live in the moment. They took so many interesting ideas and crammed them all into an epilogue voiceover, and I will never understand why. This stuff is so much more compelling than the movie we actually got, which is just kind of okay. It was pretty boring for a good chunk of the film, but there are some fun ideas here and there. Plus, in the English dub, you can hear Clancy Brown slipping into his Mr. Krabs voice pretty often, and it's kind of funny.
Kick out the humans!
Not a bad movie, but it's not as good as Over the Hedge, don't at me.
From the wind, the wind, the wind.
The Wind Rises reminds me a lot of First Man by Damien Chazelle. It's an extremely well-made and well-directed biopic that covers a subject matter I couldn't care less about and couldn't get emotionally invested in no matter how hard I tried. Seriously, I really tried to get into this movie, but I was mostly bored throughout the whole thing. I really hesitate to call it a boring movie. I think it's just more so not my thing at all. I don't find airplanes interesting, and the main character just felt incredibly emotionally distant and stoic throughout, to the point where I wasn't really interested in seeing what happened to him next. Seriously, I must reiterate, this is exactly the problem I had with First Man. It's kind of eerie. Ultimately, I thought the second half of the film was much better than the first, with the romance especially being really sweet, and the ending actually hit me pretty hard. It was really well done. The whole movie was well done and atmospheric and lived in, and man, I really wish I could rank it higher. I don't know, I think this is just a me problem, because I really don't have anything to critique with this movie compared to something like Howl's Moving Castle. I just personally couldn't connect with it, but oh well, that's life sometimes. You're not gonna like every critically acclaimed movie out there, and that's okay.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood.
My Neighbors the Yamadas is a quirky, cute little movie that I watched and enjoyed and now have no real opinions on looking back. It's a good, charming, slice-of-life series of vignettes about this family, and the best parts of the film are when it tries out a new animation style or does something super creative with the visuals, but these parts don't really happen that often. Most of the film is this basic, sketchy newspaper comic style, which is very simple but still enjoyable to watch. Takahata really loves this basic sketchy style now that I think about it. One aspect of this film I really appreciated is how funny it is, way more so than the typical Ghibli movie. It really feels like comedy was the main goal for a change, and I think it worked incredibly well. I just kind of feel like maybe this movie wore out its welcome a bit and went on a tad too long for my tastes. Plus, I found it really weird that while most of the family got equal screen time, the daughter barely got anything. She's the focus of this one long vignette towards the beginning where they leave her behind at the store and have to find her. But after that, she's relegated to the background while everyone else gets plot lines and vignettes about them. Like, what the hell? She's adorable. Why couldn't she also get into some wacky adventures?
Butting in here again since I know people in the comments will probably say something about it. My Neighbors the Yamadas is an adaptation of a popular manga that was originally of the same name that began serialization in the early 90s. The art style of the film is exactly the same as the manga chapters, and they pulled the look off flawlessly. I do not know if the vignettes here are direct adaptations of the manga or if they're originals to the movie. I didn't see anything about it in my research. And by research, I mean browsing the Wikipedia article for 5 minutes. It's kinda hilarious that Nonoko doesn't get much screen time in the film because she was actually the most popular character in the manga. So much so that a year before the movie came out, the manga was renamed to Nono-chan, now with her as the main focus over the rest of the family. Great timing, guys. Good job, you did it.
Oh well, overall, a pretty good, solid, fun time. Just nothing amazing. The fact that this movie came out in between Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away is just so crazy to me. It's incredible that Ghibli can just switch the tones of their movies on a dime like that and do something quirky, offbeat, and comedic in between their more mature and artistic fare. Actually, I guess Spirited Away is also pretty offbeat and quirky and comedic, but you still get my point.
Attention, little people!
The Secret World of Arrietty is a movie about little people, which is probably why the story feels very little compared to other Ghibli movies. This is a fun, good time, but it's pretty slow, and it definitely doesn't have the best Ghibli mods between a boy and a girl, or a human and a mythical creature. It kind of feels like we're treading the studio's usual ground, without really doing that much to stand out. It's nowhere close to the blatant copy present in Earwig and the Witch, but it's probably a distant second most derivative Ghibli film out there. Still, I had a fun time watching it until the last half hour or so. I feel like the villain in this movie was really lame, poorly set up, and just kind of unnecessary. It just didn't feel very Ghibli to suddenly throw this conflict in during the last act. Almost as if they tailored this film's story more towards Western audiences when writing it, since this was right about the time Ghibli movies were starting to get distributed in America as they came out. Speaking of Westernization, yeah, they changed some characters' names in the American dub, and I hate it. It just felt phony and unnecessary, but that's not the original movie's fault. I should have just watched the British dub that apparently exists, that features Olivia Colman, Tom Holland, and Saoirse Ronan! God damn, I really missed out. Oh well, the American dub has Will Arnett, so that's pretty good.
What's up, bitches?
So yeah, this movie's good, just kind of one of the lesser good ones.
A cat is not a dog.
The Cat Returns is extremely similar to My Neighbors the Yamadas. It's very simple and slight, a clear breather in between Studio Ghibli's more ambitious films, and its best attribute is its comedy. This one's got a ton of really funny moments, and I highly recommend the English dub just for Tim Curry alone.
That's me, babe.
Yes, Tim Curry plays this insane Cat King, and it's truly incredible.
Whoever's next better not stink, got it?
I'll admit, I wasn't completely sold on this film during the first half because of that pesky short runtime. It takes about 30 minutes for these characters to get to this crazy mystical cat kingdom, which wouldn't be a problem in a 2-hour movie, but when the movie's only 75 minutes, that just feels like a really weird pacing decision. It feels like they should have either gotten to the cat kingdom sooner or made the film longer. But honestly, the last 20 minutes kind of make up for this because they were batshit crazy. So much fun shit happens during this film's third act that it more than makes up for the fact that this film didn't really have much of a second act. I'd definitely rank the film higher if it was longer and had more time for even more fun, wacky shenanigans, but for what we got, this is still a good fun time. Plus, I just love the idea of making a spin-off of Whisper of the Heart based on the character in Shizuku's story. This is the kind of story I can picture Shizuku writing about the Baron, which is probably why the tone is so light and comedic. So yeah, good time. Probably should have been longer.
Ponyo, fishy in the sea.
Ponyo is so adorable! Oh my god, it's Ponyo! Yay! Yeah, I don't really have much to say about this one. It's just very cute. The characters are incredibly endearing, and I love the adorable relationship between Sosuke and Ponyo. The underwater scenes in this movie are absolutely mesmerizing. The score is insanely gorgeous, which I mean, you can say that about almost every Ghibli movie, but this one really sticks out. I really liked what an irresponsible driver Sosuke's mom is. Like, holy shit, you're lucky you and your son both survived. If I had any problems with this film, I'd say there are aspects of the story that aren't explained particularly well, like why exactly Ponyo is bringing about an insane climate disaster by becoming human, and the pacing is a bit off as well, with the first act going on a little too long and the third act being kinda rushed. I honestly don't even think this movie really needed a plot. It could have just been a slice of life film. But oh well, it's really cute and charming and pretty much impossible to hate. After Tales from Earthsea, this was a godsend. Whatever you do, don't watch Tales from Earthsea. Worst mistake of my life.
From the wind to the wind.
Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is the first Ghibli film ever made, kinda. It seems like they didn't release it initially since the studio didn't officially exist yet, but they later re-released it and stuff, so it counts. It's clear that even relatively early in his career, Miyazaki was an incredibly ambitious storyteller and filmmaker. The scope of this story is wonderfully grand, and the tone is as serious and heavy as it needs to be. With that said, it kinda took me a while to get into this one. The first 45 minutes or so weren't bad, but weren't particularly engaging either. They certainly had their moments, but for the most part, I wasn't really getting hooked by the main character or the setting as much as I wanted to be. Once they leave the valley, however, things really started to get more interesting. I found this sense of surreal beauty in the toxic forest. Plus, I enjoyed the character interactions and conflicts between the three main factions even more once they were better established in the story. As the climax approached, the stakes felt significantly high, and the main character's burden felt even higher. Like, damn, give this poor lady a break. Eventually, when I saw the big meatball man shoot lasers at the spaghetti-tongued bugs, I couldn't help but marvel at the epic scope of this post-apocalyptic world and its story. It was well worth watching to get to the second and third acts. I just wish the first act was more engaging. Overall, not an amazing film, but a really good one. Well worth watching.
There is a castle in the sky.
Castle in the Sky is a simple yet inherently likable movie. It's basically everything I expected one of the first Ghibli movies to be. Charming, sweet, and adventurous in spite of some darkness lingering under the surface. However, there are some aspects of this movie that I just found myself a little disappointed by. For instance, the villain. His backstory opens up some incredibly interesting potential, but I feel like I don't really know anything about him throughout most of the story. That, coupled with his frankly cliche dialogue, makes him a huge pile of missed potential, even though Mark Hamill does a great job voicing him. I love these pirate side characters, but I feel like they just don't have enough to do in the story, especially during the third act. And the main characters, while decent, really aren't too terribly interesting. Also, I'm not gonna hold this against the movie since it's a problem with the English dub, but man, I can't stand their voices. They're not awful, but Pazu's voice just doesn't sound like it fits a child character at all, and it's really distracting. And Sheeta switches accents like every other line. Like, is she British? Is she Australian? Is she American? I can't concentrate if you- Yeah, pick one. Pick one. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I also watched the subbed version just to make sure these voices weren't making me subconsciously like the movie less. And they weren't, thankfully. Ultimately, I do love the pacing, the atmosphere, and these really cool robots with some awesome visual and sound design. It's also neat to see how this movie inspired Disney and Pixar movies I love, like Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and WALL-E. It's a good, fun adventure, just not the best. Also, it's a little weird how these pirate boys are confessing their love for Sheeta when they seem to be adults and she's like a kid. You want to explain to me what you're doing?
Mr. Pig!
Porco Rosso is a pretty good movie with a pretty unique vibe compared to other Ghibli films. It doesn't have any mystical or supernatural elements outside of the fact that this man is a pig now, which doesn't really impact the story at all. And it's not calm and slice of lifey either. It's more so a realistic adventure about an ace fighter pilot post-World War I making his way as a bounty hunter. I dig it. The main character is enjoyable, and I love his interactions with Theo, who's just such a fun and plucky character. The implied potential romance thing between them is kinda sus and definitely not needed, but their interactions are really fun otherwise. I also love the ending dogfight between Porco and his rival, especially when they run out of ammo, so it just devolves into them getting out of their planes and beating each other to death. Also, how many innocent bystanders do you think died in this dogfight? Like, holy shit. Oh well, it's still fun. This is a very enjoyable movie overall, though I couldn't help but ask for a little more with some aspects of it. I wish we got to see more of Gina's perspective and maybe more of the past between her and Porco. And the stuff in the ending epilogue's narration is really rushed, despite it being potentially very interesting, kinda like Pom Poko. But overall, I liked it a lot. You fly that plane, pig boy. Fuck them fascists. Alright gamers, we're about to hit the top 10, which consists of the 8 out of 10 movies and above. Exactly like my Pixar ranking. Huh, funny how that worked out. Well yes, but actually no, I gave Luca an 8, so now there's 11 8 out of 10 and above Pixar movies. But then again, I might bump Porco up to an 8 on rewatch. It gets better the more I think about it. Okay, that's way too much semantics. The point is, this is where I talked about Squarespace in the Pixar video, and the law dictates I must also talk about Squarespace before the number 10 spot in this video as well. I don't want to break the law, my contract with you Baba dictates that this is where I need to talk about Squarespace. Haha, see? I did tie it into the topic of the video, and you thought I wasn't going to. Okay, so yeah, Squarespace. Squarespace is a fantastic, intuitive online website builder that allows you to create beautiful websites for your business or personal hobby. Present your work using Squarespace's professional portfolio designs. Display projects in customizable galleries and add password-protected pages to to share private work with clients. You can even present your videos from YouTube, Vimeo, and Animoto on your Squarespace site. Add an image overlay to your video to improve your website's load speed by waiting to embed video players until playback starts. Every design automatically includes a unique mobile experience that matches the overall style of your website, so your content will look great on every device, every time. And if you don't want that, you can always disable the mobile view from Website Manager. Buying a domain from Squarespace is simple because there are no hidden fees or price hikes. Each domain comes with an ad-free parking page and free WHOIS privacy on eligible domains. Squarespace sells over 200 top-level domains, so you can find the perfect name for your website. Choose a URL that ends in .com, .net, .org, or if you're feeling funky, you can get a more specific one like .art. If you're ready to share your passions or promote your business with the rest of the world, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/ShapeForLess to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
I'm Briggs Hatton. I wrote the Community Season 6 Incest episode.
Man, can you believe Goro Miyazaki's career once looked promising? Yeah, it turns out his second film, From Up on Poppy Hill, is actually great. I mean, Hayao Miyazaki was one of the film's writers, so that probably has something to do with it. But even ignoring the story and just looking at the direction, it's a huge step up over Tales from Earthsea. The characters are more expressive, the framing of shots is better, the editing and the way the film flows is just on point. I feel like the way he frames Tokyo wasn't that engaging and should have been a sharper contrast to the setting where the rest of the film is. But that's a nitpick. The direction here is solid overall, and I find the story really engaging. It's a nice, simple slice-of-life tale about trying to save this super cool, multi-purpose clubhouse, while there's also a romance blooming. Should I go into details about the romance and what actually happens within the plotline? No, I don't think I will.
This is a man that knows how to marry his cousin.
Oh my god, shut up, Elroy, no! Let's just say that it all works out in the end, and I was very happy, and you should be too.
It just works.
It's a very sweet and charming romance story with characters who have good chemistry and a group of teenagers you want to see succeed in the end. I had a really great time with it. That's all. We don't have to go into any more of the story. Look, there's characters in this movie named Sora and Riku. Go talk about that. Good job, Goro. You earned our respect with this movie for approximately 9 years before f***ing it all up. You know, the more I think about it, the more I realized Goro Miyazaki's career is like the plot of Chicken Little. Not just because it sucked overall, but because Goro made one little slip that turned everyone against him and embarrassed his father, redeemed himself with a big win that made everyone love him again, and then followed that up with the biggest, most horrendous f*** up in history, probably getting disowned by his father in the process. I actually feel really bad for him. Oh well, maybe he and his father can reconcile and beat all the aliens together in the final act, who knows. I might be getting a little off track here, probably because I don't want to talk about the main plot of this movie. Can you blame me? It's great though. Watch it.
All that glitters is gold.
My Neighbor Totoro is the happiest movie of all time, probably. It is such an overwhelmingly happy film that I genuinely cannot imagine anyone hating it. Is there a single person out there that hates this movie? And if so, who hurt you? Now with that said, I don't think this is quite one of Ghibli's all-time best films. It's a great one to vibe to and enjoy. I had a huge smile on my face when I watched it, but it kinda doesn't have a plot. And while there are a ton of movies where I can really appreciate that and just enjoy a laid-back slice-of-life film, I don't know if it entirely worked for me with this one. I didn't really want a conflict, I just wanted a little more whimsy and imagination. Totoro himself is barely in the film, and I really would have liked more of the film to focus on his interactions with these two girls. Either that or they encounter some other mystical creatures. I don't know. It was always enjoyable, but every time Totoro or something else magical wasn't happening on screen, I was kinda just waiting for those elements to come back. But overall, a great, super happy film. Also, not to imply unoriginality, but that cat bus does kind of remind me of Persona 5. Can't believe Ghibli copied Persona, SMH.
Let's go! Let's go, lesbians, let's go!
When Marnie Was There is the third straight Ghibli movie in a row that deserved the Best Animated Feature Oscar over whatever Disney put out that year. Actually, no, Anomalisa deserved it in 2015. Whatever. The point is, this movie is amazing. The main character, Anna, embodies depression and loneliness incredibly well, and it's so beautiful to see her spark up and start enjoying life again after meeting Marnie. The bond the two of them share is just so beautiful and intriguing, and the imagery of this movie is so striking and gorgeous, even more so than the typical Ghibli movie. It's just such a touching, dreamlike experience that really sucked me in from beginning to end. Some of the plot threads could get a little messy at times, and the reveal as to who Marnie really was definitely disappointed me a little bit. It's a neat twist and it makes for a compelling aspect of the story, but at the same time, Come on, you know there was another direction this story seemed to be heading in. It all seems pretty explicit, and then no. Oh well, I don't consider it to be malicious queerbait like some other pieces of media. I mean, Anna is still definitely gay, like there's no debate, right? She'll find a nice girl someday. And besides, in the end, the impact Marnie leaves on Anna's life is just beautiful. Even though this movie has problems, it's an incredibly emotionally investing experience that I still highly recommend. Princess Mononoke is so cool, man. This is easily the most epic and sprawling Ghibli movie of them all, showcasing such a large-scale conflict while keeping it immensely grounded and focused on a handful of characters. I got super invested in the battles between all these factions because the movie takes the time to build all of them up before knocking them down in this breathtaking mega climax. The fact that this movie casts any pretense of it being for kids aside by showing bloody decapitations and earning its PG-13 rating is a welcome touch as well. I wouldn't say the gore adds as much to the story as it does in something like Invincible, but it's still a good touch that makes the story feel way more visceral. The characters in this one are all very memorable and distinct, both in general and when compared to other Ghibli characters. The one that sticks out the most to me is Lady Eboshi, who's easily one of the best Ghibli antagonists. I love how ultra capable she is, and how there's still plenty of humanity and empathy within her despite her cold actions and demeanor. She feels like a real person and not just a power-hungry lunatic. The film also handles its environmental message in a very clever and nuanced way, plus it got me super invested in Ashitaka and San's struggles and interactions. I also loved watching this and seeing how much Breath of the Wild was inspired by it, both in terms of the visuals, but also the overall tone and feel of both pieces of art. Like, I could easily picture Link stumbling into Irontown during his journey. Not to mention how eerily similar the forest spirits in this movie are to the Koroks. And now we got this sequel where Link has a cursed arm from touching a demonic force. I mean, come on, it's not even subtle anymore. Speaking of cursed arms, one of my few complaints with this movie is how Ashitaka's curse is gonna kill him, adding a sense of urgency to the proceedings, and yet he still takes the time to help out the women in Irontown with their work. Kinda takes me out of the urgency of this plot point a little bit. Also, I feel kinda gypped that we never got to see the Boar Clan battle that heavily wounded Otako and killed all his troops. I just kinda feel like that small stretch of the climax was a little messy and didn't focus on the most compelling events that were going on at the time. But these are kind of nitpicks. This movie is absolutely stunning and well worth checking out just to see how mature, profound, humorous, and exciting this studio can be all at once. Definitely give it a watch.
Oh, that's sad. That's the saddest thing I ever heard.
I don't have any jokes for this one. I don't even know if I have anything I can really say at all. Grave of the Fireflies eviscerated my heart in a way that no other movie has done before. It starts off moderately slow, but it sinks its hooks in you as it goes along, culminating in some absolutely soul-crushing moments and sequences. I don't want to spoil a thing about it if you haven't seen it yet, since I went into it completely blind, and I think that was for the best. Just know that it's a tremendously well-made film, even though I never want to feel the way it made me feel when watching it again.
In yesterday.
Only Yesterday is the exact kind of movie I wish Pixar would make. Just an emotionally resonant and adult film about living life and trying to figure yourself out. It reminds me a lot of films like Lady Bird and Frances Ha, two films I adore and really needed at different points in my life. Only Yesterday is no different. It's an incredibly valuable film for anyone in their 20s still trying to come to grips with who they are exactly. It beautifully contrasts Taiko's childhood with her adulthood by presenting the childhood sequences in this sketchy, hazy art style, indicating that these are memories she's reflecting on but doesn't quite remember every detail of. It's genius. The little childhood vignettes in this story are so simple, yet so endearing and engaging. And I love watching adult Taiko reflect on them and inspire the people around her by telling these stories. This is a movie that on a basic structural level shouldn't work and should feel haphazard, but it all ties together so beautifully. By the end, I was really choked up, not because it's a sad ending at all, but because the theme of self-actualization in this film is so strong and so gripping that I was just that engaged by Taiko's personal journey. Not all of it is perfect, like I could honestly care less about this Terry Bogard hat-wearing guy talking about organic farming, and I feel like the last story about the poor kid could have benefited from including him in the film earlier, but for the most part, I love this film, man. It means a lot to me. It's the exact kind of compelling adult slice of life story I want to see in animation, and it's the kind of movie Western animation studios are too afraid to make for the risk of alienating kids. Well, fuck them kids. Animation is for everyone, and I couldn't be happier that Ghibli gets this. This is such a masterpiece, and it's well worth checking out.
We don't deliver. but you do.
Kiki's Delivery Service is one of only 2 Ghibli movies that I already saw before making this ranking, and I sure picked a good one to already see beforehand. This movie has all the charm and whimsy of something like Totoro, but with an actual story for us to follow and get invested in. Well, maybe story isn't the best word. This movie isn't particularly plot-driven so much as it is character-driven. It's all about the burnout you can experience from doing something you love too much because you try to make it your job. Kiki's struggle in this movie to rediscover what she loved about flying in the first place is such a relatable conflict, and I connected with it immensely. Same with going out into the world on your own and trying to make it. It's a movie that's great for kids, but I think it hits even harder for young adults who maybe don't quite know their place in the world yet. On top of how identifiable of a movie it is, it's just fun. It's funny, it's whimsical, it's magical, the characters are all memorable and enjoyable. I mean, aside from Tambo, he's kind of weird and creepy. But otherwise, this movie is amazing. It's one of the first things I think about when the name Ghibli comes up, because it represents so many of the studio's best qualities. It's delightful and great for kids, while also being really valuable for older people. It's got so many memorable moments and sequences. I think Kiki and Ursula's relationship is one of the best in all of Ghibli. Part of me feels like this movie didn't need a big epic blimp crash climax, but it still fits in pretty well, I think, and it's a good conclusion. In case you couldn't tell, I adore this movie, and I highly recommend it.
Whoa, didn't see that coming.
Going into this ranking, I kind of felt like the number 1 spot was a foregone conclusion, and I was more so looking forward to figuring out which movie would get ranked at number 2. Because Spirited Away had the top spot in the bag. There's no way it would ever get ranked at number 2, and I was absolutely right about that. Number 3 is Spirited Away.
What?
I know, I'm shocked too. After years and years of having this be the only Ghibli movie I'd ever seen, before checking out Kiki in 2020 and the rest of these in 2021, I just assumed that it was the best, since that's what everyone says. Which is why I was especially shocked to find that there was one movie that was even better, and 2 movies that I liked better. Yeah, I'm just gonna tell you right now, I think the number 2 movie on this list is the best Ghibli movie, but the number 1 film is my favorite, even if critically, I don't think it's as strong as Spirited Away and the number 2 film. I just had to rank it in the number 1 spot because this is my list, and if I don't rank it number 1, who will? Every other list has Spirited Away at number 1. I prefer to be honest with myself about the movie that means the most to me personally. Okay, that was a lot of rambling about not Spirited Away, so let's ramble about Spirited Away now. It's just as good as everyone says it is, to the point where I don't know if there's anything left to add, honestly. I talked about it before in the best animated feature ranking video, and I'd still rank it at number 1 on that list. It's just such a beautifully realized film, taking all of Ghibli's best attributes and magnifying them to an insane degree. It's the most vivid and whimsical Ghibli world ever created. It's magical and welcoming, but also dark and sinister when it needs to be. Every single character is memorable in their own right, and the main character's growth is astonishing. It's a movie that simultaneously has an incredibly compelling overarching plot, while also being a great episodic film to just vibe to. I almost wish it could be like 10 hours longer. Honestly, a TV show featuring all these characters would probably slap. Everyone has said every possible good thing about this movie. It's a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. I'm so glad it was my introduction to Ghibli, and it should probably be everyone's introduction to the studio. It's Hayao Miyazaki's best film, it's his magnum opus, and it's also the magnum opus of Studio Ghibli as a whole. It's goddamn Spirited Away. What the hell else needs to be said? And more importantly, what the hell do I think is better than this movie? Okay, so what movie could have possibly topped Spirited Away and taken the title of the best Ghibli movie in my opinion? Because that just seems too far-fetched to be true. A movie better than Spirited Away would have to be utterly transcendent. It would have to be inhumanly spectacular. A movie that feels less like it was crafted by actual people and more like something that was gifted to us from the heavens. I was pretty confident going in that no such movie existed. And I was dead fucking wrong. The Tale of the Princess Kaguya is one of the best movies I have ever seen in my life. It doesn't feel real. I honestly didn't know movies could be this good, and I'm struggling to think of a single thing wrong with it. This is the film that Takahata's entire career was building towards. The masterpiece he was always destined to make. He is without a doubt my favorite Ghibli director. Even though I didn't love Pom Poko and My Neighbors the Yamadas, he did such a tremendously amazing amazing job at developing the profoundly human stories at the heart of Grave of the Fireflies and Only Yesterday. He's just so amazing at showcasing the complex range of human emotions. Better than Miyazaki, in fact, who's still obviously great at it, but tends to focus more on the magical fantasy worlds he's created. But with Takahata, you feel every character's emotion right alongside them, and that's how I describe the tale of the Princess Kaguya. I felt every conceivable emotion known to man. I was unbelievably charmed and laughing during the opening act. I felt tremendous irritation and anger as Kaguya's father got consumed by his greed. I experienced such profound sorrow every time Kaguya's life and happiness got ripped away from her piece by piece. Sorrow might be an understatement, actually. I don't think any piece of media has made me cry as much as this one has. Not just at the end, but throughout the entire film. It just puts you so perfectly in the depressing headspace of this character, to the point where you feel every single emotion she feels. But at the same time, this movie isn't dull or lifeless, it's literally the opposite. Not only is there still the typical Ghibli lighthearted and humorous moments, but the art style is absolutely stunning and evokes ancient Japanese folklore so perfectly. It's a film as beautiful to look at as it is to immerse yourself within the story, which expertly portrays so many profound themes. That of depression, women being restricted in society, unrealistic standards of beauty and elegance, whether it's worth it to suffer just for the sake of living an authentic life, and so much more. The emotional depth of this movie is astounding in how limitless it feels. I could talk about it for hours and never come close to saying everything there is to say about it. Spirited Away remains Ghibli's magnum opus, their most important and unforgettable film. But I personally believe The Tale of the Princess Kaguya is the best Ghibli film. One that should be revered as such for generations to come. Much like how I once said Ratatouille felt too mature and profound even for the already excellent Pixar, the same sentiment absolutely applies to this movie. It feels too amazing to be a Ghibli movie. Let that one sink in. I've been hemming and hawing over what I consider to be the best animated film ever made is. Between Spirited Away, The Prince of Egypt, The Incredibles, all that jazz. But I finally figured it out. It's this. I have never seen an animated movie so flawlessly told, so magnificently realized, and so overwhelmingly powerful until I saw The Tale of the Princess Kaguya. And do you want to know the most insane thing about all of this? This is not my favorite animated film of all time. Where do I even begin? Whisper of the Heart hit me so insanely hard in so many ways. It made me feel seen in a way so few movies ever do. The last time I felt this way watching something was when I first saw Lady Bird 4 years ago, so it's been a while. But wow, special doesn't begin to describe how I feel about this movie. I didn't know anything about it going in, and when it opens up with country roads, I was like, okay, what the fuck is this? The main character in this movie constantly rewrites the lyrics to Country Roads in her spare time. That sounds like a joke, but the movie genuinely gets me super invested in these variations on this song as it goes along, displaying Shizuku's blossoming writing prowess despite her lack of faith in herself. My favorite scene in the whole movie, my favorite scene in all of Ghibli is just her and Seiji performing the song together, only for his grandfather and his friends to walk in and start performing with them. It's just a magical moment that's well built up to, and a beautiful way for the two leads to come together. Shizuku and Seiji's chemistry over the course of the film is incredibly natural, and the way they continually inspire each other to become great artists is so beautiful. And that's really what's at the core of this film. The struggle to create something, to be an artist, despite believing that you're not good enough. Shizuku grapples so hard with so many immensely relatable struggles regarding her writing, constantly having to ask herself, is it good enough to show others? Is it worth it to keep pursuing this? Am I good enough to be with someone who seems to have everything put together while I have no idea what I want to do with my life? I'm in this movie and I don't like it. I'll fully admit that I probably connected to this film so much because of how much I saw my own struggles with writing in Shizuku. But regardless, I feel like this is the kind of film anyone can relate to and see themselves in. Anyone who's anxious about their life and what the future holds will probably derive a ton of value from this film. And even besides that, it's just a really charming slice of life story. The romance is sweet and endearing, the characters are all enjoyable, the animation and score really stick out and create such beautiful moments, even by Ghibli standards. The plot is very simple, especially during the first half, but it's never aimless, it all still feels purposeful. And yeah, at the end of the day, this is an incredibly well realized and beautiful depiction of someone who's just trying to figure out their place in the world and discover their self-worth through their art. I cried multiple times throughout the course of the story, even at parts that I doubt were intended to be sad, simply because I felt them deep down in my soul. It's just beautiful. Not just my favorite Ghibli movie of all time, not just my favorite animated movie of all time, but one of my top 5 favorite movies ever made. I don't think it's as good as Kaguya or Spirited Away, but it honestly means more to me than both of those movies combined. And after what I just said about both of those movies, that's some inconceivably high praise. It broke my heart to learn that this was the only movie that Yoshifumi Kondo got to direct before his untimely death. He was apparently expected to be Miyazaki and Takahata's eventual successor, and looking at how incredible this film turned out, it's easy to see why. I really hope all of you immediately watch this movie. It would genuinely mean the world to me if more people got to experience it and fall in love with it the way I did. I can't believe I unironically love Country Roads now. What the hell did you do to me, movie?